The Silicon Power XPOWER Turbine RGB has been on the market for quite a while now. The kit featured in this review is running at a speed of 3200MHz and has a total capacity of 32GB. The timings used with the 3200MHz frequency are 16, 18, 18, 38 with a voltage of 1.35 volts. The price of this kit of memory at the moment of doing this review is around $150 or euros, depending on the availability and the retailer you choose. The XPOWER Turbine RGB has a low profile heatsink, and due to its neutral color, it can be matched with any system you want to make, be it gaming or a workstation. The low profile heatsink also means that this RAM kit will be compatible with most air CPU coolers on the market, and it will work great with small form factor cases and motherboards. The height of the RAM sticks is approximately 38mm, and if you want to remove the heatsink, then the RAM sticks will have a height of just 33mm. The RGB part of this RAM kit is present at the top of each RAM module, which is mostly what everyone is doing these days. It is done in the shape of a plastic beam that has a semi-transparent texture to better blend the light and colors of the LEDs. The LEDs themselves are soldered directly to the side of the PCB and are the half-dome type LEDs. In terms of the illumination, there are multiple patterns to choose from, and everything RGB related can be controlled through your motherboard's software. Speaking of which, the XPOWER Turbine RGB RAM kits are compatible with all motherboard RGB controllers available. This includes the Asus Aura Sync, Gigabyte's RGB Fusion, MSI Mystic Light Sync, and finally the ASRock Polychrome Sync. A great thing, since it not only uses a software which might already be installed in your system, but it decreases the overall clutter of your operating system, not needing a dedicated piece of software, which oftentimes, as we have seen, are poorly made. The heatsink has a dual-side design, and it is attached to the PCB and memory chips by just a few self-adhesive thermal pads. To remove the heatsink, all you need to do is to gently pry it off the RAM stick, but be careful when doing so, and I will recommend heating up the RAM stick before attempting this. This way, the adhesive will soften and everything will be easier to remove. With the heatsink removed, we get to see that each side of the heatsink itself is rather thin and slots into the top mounted plastic plate, so at least when you put it back in, you will be absolutely sure that it is centered and not misaligned. The XPOWER Turbine RGB uses Silicon Power branded memory chips, which have the following serial number 4N8089HCBE. This particular serial number does not return any search results, as in nothing at all. Fortunately, by using a software, I was able to discover that these memory chips are in fact made by Hynix and have their real serial number as H5AN8G8NAFR. Quite a weird way to discover what RAM chips you are using, but nevertheless, here they are. From the factory, this RAM kit should run at the advertised speed of 3200MHz. However, to make sure it does that, you first need to enter into the BIOS and select the standard XMP profile that will enable both the higher frequency and the required timings for that. The platform for testing RAM type memory, unless otherwise stated, is composed out of an Intel i9-9900K running at the factory settings and a single MSI RTX 2070 Super Trio graphics card with a Z390 ASRock motherboard. Before we get into the testing and performance of the RAM kit, let's see what overclocking can be done with the XPOWER Turbine RGB. With a factory frequency starting at 3200MHz, I was able to overclock this RAM kit to 3466MHz, while maintaining the factory timings of 16, 18, 18, 38, with a small bump in voltage of course. A 200MHz overclock is not an amazing overclock result, but it was achieved while maintaining the factory timings, and that is what brings the most performance in real world, maintaining a relative low timing while increasing the frequency. The first test uses the game Shadow of the Tomb Raider, running at 1080p with all the graphical settings running at their maximum values within the Ultra preset, with pure hair set to low and vertical synchronization disabled, among other things. And in this game, the XPOWER Turbine RGB, while running at its advertised frequency of 3200MHz, reached an average frame rate of 127 frames per second, with the low 1% at 107 frames per second and the 0.1% at 92 frames per second. However, with the RAM kit overclocked to 3466 MHz, the average frame rate raised to 130 frames per second, with the low 1% reaching 117 frames per second and the 0.1% hovering at around 103 frames per second. The next test is the memory benchmark of the AIDA 64 Extreme software. In this test, each memory kit is running at its advertised speed and timings with the XMP profile enabled. Overclocking the reviewed RAM kits within these synthetic benchmarks has little to no use, as not only each RAM kit will overclock differently, but a synthetic benchmark has no real life value, as you're not exactly doing them every single day, unlike gaming of course. Anyway, in this test, the XPOWER Turbine RGB is on the third place in our graph, being behind two Ballistics RAM kits, both running at lower timings with a higher overall frequency, which shows perfectly the idea behind trying to overclock smart, keeping the timings low while increasing the frequency. The next test in our review is the Cinebench R15, and yes, I know that Cinebench R20 is out and everyone is using that. I'm working on it, have some patience. And in this test, the SiliconPower RAM kit reached a CPU score of 2078 and an OpenGL score of just 191.1. Again, this is where both frequency and timings matter, and it is shown within the hierarchy of the graphs. For some reason, the OpenGL score is lower than what I would have liked to see from such a memory kit, but the difference is small enough to count it as within the margin of error. And finally, we have the benchmark Super P 1.5 running in 32M mode. This benchmark is simple. It is only about pure processing power, as it does calculations of a number and records the time required by the system to reach the result of said calculations. It has been used for years to test the stability and performance of both RAM and CPU overclocking, and this is why we are using it today. Obviously, the lower the number and thus the shorter the time the system required to reach the desired result, the better the performance is. And in this test, the XPOWER Turbine RGB is placed on the second position, being ahead of the Ballistic Gaming RAM kit, which runs at the same frequency of 3200 MHz, but being behind a memory kit that is running at 3600 MHz from the factory. The SiliconPower XPOWER Turbine RGB offers plenty of things for the asked price. Talking about the price, it is not exactly cheap, but truth be told, neither are the competing RAM kits, and here I am talking mostly about RAM kits with a total capacity of 32GB and running at 3200 MHz with XMP enabled. Nevertheless, even a small price decrease would have made the XPOWER Turbine RGB stand out from the crowd even more. The performance is good in all areas, while the overclocking is adequate. And that's what I'll say, adequate. Yes, I expected more, especially from memory chips which apparently are made by Hynix. But 200 MHz is what I could get while keeping the original timings. Perhaps I could have gone higher in terms of frequency if I were to loosen the timings, but that's really counterproductive. The design of this RAM kit is a mixed bag, and that's a good thing to have nowadays. First of all, the heat spreaders have a linear brush texture that will reflect all the light around the RAM kit. Also, the color itself is not just plain silver, it is a shade or two close to gunmetal gray, a thing which makes the RAM kit easier to match with most systems, especially workstations that do not require or want flashing everything on their motherboard. There is also the RGB side of things, and the XPOWER Turbine RGB has it. It has plenty of it actually. In terms of the look of the whole system, it is good and on par with other RAM kits on the market. The colors are vibrant and the light intensity is very good. The great thing about this RGB system is, however, the usage of the motherboard's software for the control of the LEDs and not having a standalone software for controlling just some LEDs. And I cannot say this enough, as I am getting a bit tired of cheaply made software that is made to do just one thing and one thing alone, and fails even at that, because well, every kit of RAM has to have its own software now because reasons. The XPOWER Turbine RGB does not have any of these issues, as it is compatible with all of the motherboard manufacturer's RGB software, which also means that you can synchronize the RGB LEDs from the RAM kit with the rest of your system and thus create that seamless color transition that everyone wants in their system. And finally, the build quality, which is pretty good, albeit the heatsink is on the thin side, no pun intended. It does its job and integrates with the plastic RGB diffuser installed at the top of each RAM module. Is this RAM kit worth the asking price, however? Well, yes it is. because it offers a good performance and it has no compatibility issues as far as I could see. Also, the overclocking potential is there, albeit small, but it is there, and while overclocked, the RAM kit did not create any issues. The Silicon Power XPOWER Turbine RGB is a good choice worth considering, especially in a market that is filled up with cheaply made RGB RAM kits that offer questionable overclocking potential and worse, questionable compatibility, especially with Ryzen systems. If you liked this review, then you can perhaps consider subscribing for more, and also if you want to support the channel directly, then in the description below you can find linked both the Patreon and subscriber star pages of the channel.